Great, well, welcome everybody. It's really good to see so many of you here today. I think we're going to try and make a start if that's okay. So I might ask you to save the conversations. There'll be plenty of breaks throughout the day where we can continue to chat and catch up. So for those that don't know me, I'm Leni. I'm Head of Politics and Governance here at ODI, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this workshop, which is convened jointly between ODI and the Building State Capability Programme at Harvard. And it's fantastic that we've got Lance, Salima, colleagues, Matt Andrews, who I think is winging his way here from the airport as we speak and will be here in the next hour or so. I'm just going to have a little bit of introduction today, a bit of background as to why we're all here and meeting again, and talk you through the sort of plan and how we've structured the agenda. So a bit of background. I think it's been fascinating to see policy ideas that have been around on the margins for a really long time become the subject of pretty intense debate over the last couple of years. We've now got new buzzwords, whether that's PDIA, adaptive management, adaptive programming, DDD, and more. Ideas that were previously seen as being unrealistic, a bit wacky, now are seen to be possible. And I think it's been great to see ideas that came through in our Doing Development Differently manifesto, of which there are copies at the back of your participant pack, start to come to fruition, or at least start to be recognised as things to take really seriously. Now, that manifesto grew out of a meeting that a few of you in the room today were at a couple of years ago in Harvard, which was, I think, kind of a special event for those of us who were there. It felt like it captured a set of examples and ideas about what really successful development programs actually look like, and triggered a lot of reflection on just how far that seemed to be from the norm of a lot of development practice at that time, particularly when aid was involved. And again, even just a few years ago when we met in Harvard, it felt like those ideas weren't getting as much purchase as we wanted them to have on policy and practice, whether that's of large development agencies, developing country governments, or others. Today it feels sometimes like there's almost daily discussions about these themes, and a number of organisations, including some of those who are in the room today, have put commitments in place to put some of these ideas into practice, are starting to make headway, are starting to share their lessons. So I guess it felt like a really good opportunity now, 2 years on, to take stock and to reflect on what have we been learning and where have we been going. I guess to take stock, it feels like we also just need to be clear about what it is we're discussing. And so I thought I'd give a little bit of background about where I think this stuff comes from. Again, the manifesto which you've got, I think, still does a pretty good job, actually, of capturing what the core ideas here are and pulling them together in a nice sort of package. But to me, that agenda kind of grew out of at least two observations that I think a number of us have come to. The first is that development efforts, to a large extent, are not about knowledge or money transfers alone. They're about affecting change in economic, social, and political systems. And those systems are themselves complex. They're constantly evolving, adapting, responding. The second observation is that, because of that, ready-made solutions, sort of templates of best practice, actually rarely work and sometimes can do real harm. So what we need are interventions that can learn, that can be adaptive, that can be iterative, and that as far as possible can actually be steered by those who are affected by them, right? This is not an agenda that should be pushed by external actors. It should be about local actors, whoever they are. I think, in addition, one of the key drivers actually for us at ODI in co-convening and being involved in the Doing Development Differently work was the recognition that this agenda is not restricted to any one particular area of development work. It seems to me that the big challenges that we face around the world do involve power and interests and what I would call politics. And I think that's why Doing Development Differently is closely aligned with related agendas like thinking and working politically. But at the same time, I think that doesn't mean it's only relevant for what's often called governance programming, efforts to reform public sector institutions, build accountability, shape political institutions of different kinds. And actually, I head a program at ODI that works on politics and governance, and I have long been struck by the fact that some of the work and investments in those areas can be the sort of worst examples of not doing development differently. So I think we need to be clear this is a broader agenda than that. But I think the one thing that, and the thing that's been really striking to me is over the last couple of years, just how much activity there has been in this space, how much recognition of some of those observations. And a number of you have sent in submissions, which we're really grateful for. We're going to be putting them together in a nice report at the end that showcases a lot of the activity that's happening across this community. Looking across those submissions, there's a huge amount of lived experience of just trying to put this into practice on the ground in different countries. I think we had 24, 25 country examples that people submitted to us. There's been more investment financially, more programs that are signalling these sorts of principles and ideas in what they're trying to support. And I think crucially, there's been a real shift towards a recognition that this is about a change process that needs to happen within lots of different organizations. So what are the changes in rules, in processes, but also people and systems that need to happen? In the various things that you sent in, there was lots of name checking of things like getting the right corporate ethos, culture, the right skills, competencies, the right performance measures and incentives, and thinking about how you do that within your organizations. And I think that's great. If we think about the sort of idea of the hype cycle that people often talk about, when a new idea comes in and we have these inflated expectations and then a dip, and then at some point we hope things start to get uptake and level out. Where we are in that hype cycle, I think probably depends a bit on how we're feeling each day as to whether we're in the real dip or we're starting to see something stick. But it does feel like we're moving beyond this just being a buzz, a fad, and potentially really getting into what does it take to embed it in the longer term. So I guess there's just 3 observations that I have on that trajectory that I think or hope will shape some of our discussions today. The first is I think the hype cycle is still a sort of useful idea because it signals that progress is only possible if some ideas actually die off, if there is some failure and we learn from that and get better as a result. And I think these types of programs, these ways of working are hard. We've been finding that in ODI as we've been increasingly challenged to kind of put our money where our mouth is and be involved in their implementation. They are not easy to do. And I think we need to be a bit more open, honest, perhaps humble about that as we're talking about it. Because while we do want to advocate for change, we also need to be open about what we're learning, including where we're not getting it right. So I think whereas some of us who met in Harvard a couple of years ago were very much talking about our successes, we hope that today we can actually reflect a bit on some of our struggles and some of the hard-fought lessons that we have here as well. Second point is, again, I think we should be optimistic that we've moved beyond having a handful of good examples to real discussions about how different organizations need to change. Work is underway, including work that we've been involved in with different agencies, to really look at internal incentives, behaviors, motivations within different organizations. And it's not clear where these reform efforts will end up and how far they'll go. To me, a pressing concern is that while I think there's been good progress in a number of agencies to simplify rules and processes to enable them to work in these sorts of ways, those efforts are still quite fragmented. And I think there are real questions about whether leaderships, whether that's political leaders or senior managers of different kinds, are really bought into this agenda, particularly as it feels like we're definitely entering turbulent times in many parts of the world that we sit in. So what does that mean? And I think the final observation is I think we have been criticised, and when we met in Harvard a couple of years ago, we were criticised then for being too aid-focused. And I think on the one hand, we should be clear there is an aid reform agenda here, and that's important. But actually, this agenda is about so much more than that. Donors don't actually do development, right? And it's great that there are people here who can talk about their experience sat within governments and a whole range of other organisations putting these ideas into practice. And please do look through the list of participants because I think it shows some of the diversity now about who's in the room and debating these ideas. So those ideas very much shaped how we and the team from Harvard wanted to structure our agenda today. You've got copies of that in your pack. But just to give you a very quick recap, shortly we'll have a panel that's looking at how these agendas are travelling within different communities of practice. from NGOs to humanitarian organisations, large implementers, open data communities, thinking about where are each of those communities on our sort of hype cycle. We'll then have a session looking at putting PDIA into practice. Again, really the lived experiences. How does this feel when you're doing it on the ground? What's really different? After lunch, we'll have a session on whether large donors can do things differently and what are the kind of reform efforts that are underway and how are they getting on. And then we'll have a final session that looks at learning and results, a piece that I think is a key part of the puzzle of this agenda and that I don't think we're really always getting right now. So there'll be various breakout groups for more focused discussions, ranging from looking at, I think, DFID's largest public sector reform program in Nigeria and how learning is being integrated within that, to looking at PDIA in practice and some of the work they've been doing around their results frameworks, search frames, and so on. Looking at how you build and support learning if you're working within a big government reform and change process. And a session looking at how do we better communicate all of this to publics and build political strategies around it, something which with Brexit, US elections, and more, it feels like is only becoming more relevant. And then we'll finally come back together at the end to think about lessons and where we go from here. A couple of quick housekeeping points. All our breaks will be next door. Tea, coffee, lunch provided there. And bathrooms are straight down to the right, last door on the left. All presentations will be filmed, but then the Q&A and discussion won't be. And we're aiming for a sort of Chatham House rules, i.e. people should speak freely, they won't be quoted, but people can, of course, comment on the key themes that come out of the discussion. So that's the aim for today. And now I'm going to hand over to Lant, who I think is going to add some of his words of welcome, but also give us some further food for thought or inspiration for the day. So there you go. And your slides are up there.
Thanks.